Un vent d'espoir encore fragile souffle.
A weak, fragile wind of hope is blowing over Europe, just emerging from one of the most serious economic crises in its history. Europe still faces dangers. This is a deciding moment. So will Europe be able to find the necessary resources for its survival? We're now live on Euronews, and we'll be talking about these questions and many others as well with the man at the top of Europe. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, will be talking to 3 young and influential YouTubers and answering the questions from viewers and web users as well. Everyone wants to know what the future holds for them.
Bonjour de Bruxelles.
Good afternoon from Brussels and welcome to this special edition of Ask Juncker. We'll be live with the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. In these uncertain times, his mission is to build the future of Europe. Yesterday, he set out his roadmap in his State of the Union address. Despite a renewal of optimism thanks to an economic upswing, there are many challenges still to face. The migratory crisis, Brexit, the respect of fundamental rights, terrorism, just to mention a few. One false move and the EU could collapse, and it's young people who will pay the price. For an hour now, 3 YouTubers will be talking to the President and asking them about subjects that they are concerned about, and you'll also be able to ask the President questions as well by sending in your questions via the Euronews social media using the hashtag #AskJuncker, and I'll be picking out the best questions to ask the President as we go along. But first of all, let's take a look at a little clip of the proposals put forward by Jean-Claude Juncker on Europe. Let's take a look together.
Le 13 septembre, Jean-Claude Juncker a
On the 13th of September, Juncker set out his action plan for the following year. More integration, particularly in the monetary sphere, and a strengthened fight against terrorism, broadening of the Schengen area, and extending the Union to the Balkans. It's an ambitious programme, especially as he's got less than 2 years at the head of the European Commission. On migration, Europe, he said, is not a fortress, but people who should not be allowed to stay must be returned to their country. Only 36% of illegal migrants are actually sent back again. So clearly, we must intensify our efforts in this area. This is a position which is shared by Europeans, or Europeans who we asked here in Budapest. It's absolutely crucial that we resolve this issue of migration. I am in favour of strict border controls. I would like to see only those who can integrate and who are genuine refugees come into Europe, but not economic migrants. Jean-Claude Juncker also extended a welcome to countries in the south, ending a 2-speed Europe. Europe must be a union of equals. That means equality between large and small member states. Europe must breathe with both its lungs, in the east and in the west. If it doesn't do this, then we will simply run out of breath. Post-Brexit, they'll be concentrating on integration and enlargement, said President Juncker, and he invited Bulgaria and Romania and then Croatia to join the Schengen area. He also reawakened the hopes of the Western Balkans of joining the EU. And that is something that viewers seem to be satisfied by. Yes, we must increase the Schengen area, and we must introduce the euro throughout Europe. We must help the weakest states, and we must help European countries which have problems. The final word is from Brussels with sincere words of encouragement for the President. I hope he'll make wise decisions, and I wish him all the very best and much courage. We're very pleased to welcome the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, here in the studio. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here. Like last year, our web users and those following on Debating Europe have lots of questions for you, and we'll be asking you those questions during the programme. They're using the hashtag #AskJuncker, as you've probably seen. Yesterday, you gave your State of the Union address. It was an ambitious speech, very bold. But everyone was expecting a little more to be said about Brexit. And in fact, that was one of the words which was most often tweeted during your speech. Why aren't you talking about it if it's a subject which is of such concern to Europeans?
I think this subject should be of concern to the British primarily, of less concern to Europeans. And I don't want to preach to people or try and educate them about Brexit. I've had many opportunities to discuss Brexit, and Brexit isn't the future. Brexit has already become the past, and I wanted to look towards the future.
We have, in fact, some questions from web users. We're going to be getting lots of questions about Brexit, in fact. Let me quote what I said during your speech. On Brexit, you said, "We regret this, and you will regret this soon." That is something that viewers have been asking about. Room Johnson has a question about this as well. He was asking if that was a threat.
No, it was the answer to a question. I wasn't intending to say you will regret it soon, but the MEPs of UKIP and the extreme right raised this question, and my answer was, we will always regret this decision of the British people. Well, we accept the British people's decision. They interrupted me, and that was my response to them interrupting my speech.
I have another question. This is from John Lees on Brexit again. Do you want the UK to suffer during the negotiations in order to dissuade other countries from leaving Europe?
That's not my working hypothesis. I don't know of any other country that would be tempted to leave the European Union, and I don't want to punish or sanction or make the British people suffer. I like them too much, and they have been in Europe for a long time, and that has benefited all of us. So I don't have any hard feelings vis-à-vis the UK. Negotiations are underway. And obviously, once the UK has left the European Union, it will no longer have the same status as it had, either as regards Europe or the international scene.
There's a lot of bitterness in this discussion between the Commission and the UK. Do you think that we'll be successful here?
My working hypothesis is that there will be a deal. I don't want to imagine a situation where the UK would just leave the EU without a deal, saying goodbye to all of us without an arrangement for the future. So I don't envisage a hard Brexit.
Let's move to the future now. You said yourself that we have 3 young YouTubers outside in the corridors, and they're waiting to interview you. They have hundreds of thousands of fans who sent them in questions as well. Now, as you know, the rules are that you don't know what the questions are.
I don't want to know the questions, but I like to know the answers.
Today on Euronews, we'll be welcoming Abdel. He's from Belgium, and he runs a humorous, quirky YouTube channel, but he also uses it to talk about serious subjects such as Islamophobia, immigration, and social justice. We'll also be welcoming Diana, who is from Germany, and she's interested in the impact of digital transformation on the world of work, on education, and she's interested in the future of Europe too. But to kick off our Q&A session, we'll be hearing from Kovy, who's come from the Czech Republic. It goes without saying that he is heavily into social media and is very interested in the gap between generations and the migratory crisis. Here's a video clip about him.
Karel Kovář, but my fans mostly know me as Kovy, because that's my nickname on YouTube, which I'm doing for more than 5 years now. I'm 20 years old, I live in Prague in the Czech Republic, which is a lovely city. If you haven't visited, you have to. I'm doing a little promo. 5 years ago, I've established the channel on YouTube, and that was the start of the long path on the social media and YouTube for me, which led to this very moment. My channel is mostly about entertainment. I do traveling vlogs, topic videos, gigs, parody songs. I often talk about social media and sometimes about politics as well. Which is maybe the reason that I was chosen as one of the 3 European YouTubers who will interview the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker himself. And I honestly can't wait.
Je suis ravie d'avoir Kovy.
I'm thrilled to welcome
Kovy, thanks so much.
Kovy to the studio.
You've come all this
Thank you
way.
for inviting me.
So you're going to be speaking to the President in just a moment, but I just wanted to know, how do you feel about these EU politicians? Do you think they're in touch with what you need, and do you kind of trust them with your future?
Well, if I should talk to for myself or for the young generation, I really think that sometimes it's very hard to keep on going with European Union and really pay attention on what's happening, because sometimes for young people especially it's very hard to pay attention to everything what's happening.
Okay, Kovy, well, let's go meet the President. He's waiting for us just here. Monsieur le Président, je suis ravie de vous présenter.
President, may I present Kovy to you?
You have 15 minutes with the President. Off you go. 15 minutes.
Okay.
And I'll stop you if it goes over.
Yeah. Perfect. Yesterday we gave a speech in Strasbourg. Now we are sitting here in Brussels, which basically marks the first topic I would like to discuss with you, which is moving of the European Parliament between Strasbourg and Brussels. Yesterday you said, and I quote, "I want Europe to become the leader when it comes to the fight against climate change." But this moving itself, it causes around 10,000 tons of CO2, and it's incredibly expensive. According to recent studies, around 100 million euros per year. So why is this still a thing?
Because this is the consequence of European history. Strasbourg is a city located in France, but very close to Germany, the Rhine River, which is the most dramatic and tragic river in Europe, was witnessing so many conflicts, and the fact that the European Parliament, the symbol of the European democracy, is meeting in Strasbourg is meaningful. The Council of Europe, 48, 49 countries, they are there, and the European Union has to have its place there. So I know that this is costly, but history is always costly.
So you think we should pay that much for the symbol and taxpayers should pay this cost?
Taxpayers can't escape to the consequences of history.
All right. That was pretty strong. Okay, I think not only young people struggle to make a point where when I ask them, for example, about something positive about being a member of European Union, I also hear about peace, I hear about trade, Schengen area, and cancelled roaming, but I hear much more of a criticism when it comes to a different kind of regulations, and the fact that EU is sometimes not really flexible and fast when it comes to hard decisions or hard issues. So what do you think is a problem that not only young people but European citizens mostly see disadvantages or problems instead of positive things that are happening?
I think that's quite normal. Disadvantages are easy to be described. Advantages have to be proved. I would like to invite those who are skeptical, and skepticism is accepted, admitted. We have to deal with the arguments of those who are reluctant when it comes to European integration. We have to ask people if they would prefer to live on a continent which would be divided, where countries would be dramatically separated, where the freedom of movement would not exist, or if they prefer to live in this European Union. One does better understand what the European Union is about if one is thinking what could be the exact opposite. The exact opposite would be awful, and in our situation is not always beautiful.
All right. When it comes to young generation, especially, it sometimes struggle to understand some topics, and it's often very hard for young generation to find some interesting way of getting to know the European Union. Do you think there is something that should be done better when it comes to communicating with young generation?
It's not only difficult for the younger generation; it's also difficult for the former generation, and also difficult for my own generation. And it's sometimes difficult for myself to understand exactly how things are working. I do think that we have to improve our communication, although the communication service of the Commission is publishing hundreds, if not thousands of pages per week and per month. But I have the impression that the informations we are giving, objective information, because this is not about propaganda, they are not reaching the general public. And that's the reason why I have asked the commissioners to travel around, not to stay in Berlin on this, in fact, awful building, but to visit national parliaments, to discuss with national social partners. We are organizing hundreds of times per year so-called citizen dialogues. I'm myself participating in these events. That's the way we have to explain Europe without having this propaganda in mind. This is not helpful. We have to explain.
Definitely.
We have not to advocate. Sometimes we have to advocate. We have to plead for Europe. But propaganda is not good. And young people don't believe in propaganda. Hopefully
Definitely not. Yeah.
Hopefully not in the propaganda from the
if...
extreme right, nor in the propaganda of the Commission. And the two speeches are very different.
I think it would be great if, for example, EP members would be going from school to school and talk with kids about these problems.
That's what they are doing.
Which would be great.
That's what they are doing. Members of the European Parliament are at least 20, 30 times per day in a classroom somewhere in Europe. So
right. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I wasn't lucky enough to meet any of those. Okay. Let's move on a bit. I would like to be a bit theoretical now. Let's imagine
Don't be too theoretical.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Because if you are inviting me to be theoretical, it will be...
it'll be very long. Okay, so let's keep it short. Okay, let's imagine that in a few weeks there would be a new conflict, for example, in the North Africa, which would cause to a new wave of immigrants coming to Europe. Is European Union, after those 2 years of dealing with this problem, ready? Is there anything we can call as a strategy, and what would happen with those people?
We have a strategy. I mean, we means the Commission. We have proposed 2 years ago to put in place a system of distribution of refugees, because what I can't accept is that those who by geography are located at the external border, Greece, Italy now, mainly Italy now, Spain, others, that they have to receive all these refugees, because this is overstretching their possibilities. That's the reason why we as a Commission propose to the member states of the European Union to distribute these refugees amongst all.
Talking about quotas, right?
Yeah, that's I did try to avoid that wording, but as you are suggesting it to me, but it's not really quotas. It's the passage from theory to practice. It's easy to say that the European Union is a union of solidarity, but when it comes to implementing the basic principles of solidarity, some member states do disagree. But we can't leave to Italy and to Greece
I agree
the
with
whole
your point.
weight of responsibilities.
But many states in Eastern Europe are not really sure about refugees. Not all of them are well checked. Some of them have no IDs, and sometimes it can lead to problems with integration, for example. So, are we really sure that we would be distributing people who we know who they are?
I do think that those countries receiving refugees, landing in Italy or in Greece and going then to other countries, have the right to know who is coming. And I'm strongly in favor of putting into place a system which does partially exist, where member states receiving refugees can check the identity, the ways, the behaviors of those they are ready to invite to their country. That's a perfect right of those receiving refugees having landed in other parts of Europe.
All right. Let's talk, when we talk about refugees, let's talk about EU and Turkey relations. You criticized Turkey in your recent speech. You called out Turkey for keeping our journalists in jail and coming further from democratic values. But in the same time, there is a EU-Turkey deal about refugees where we are paying Turkey big amounts of money for keeping refugees. So do you really think that this criticism can be somehow important for Turkey when they just don't care and they can say we don't really care because you're paying us?
I would like to come back to communication and information. Turkey is not receiving money from the European Union.
Well, there was a deal.
NGOs, there was a deal because we needed a deal because now we have a number of refugees coming from Turkey which is by 97 or 98% lower than before we entered that deal, but the money which is shifted to Turkey is not going to Turkey and into the Turkish budget and to the Turkish government. It's money paid for NGOs dealing with
well, isn't
the
it
refugees.
A quite similar thing?
That's not similar. I prefer giving money to NGOs, mainly to those who are very active in the humanitarian field, than giving money to the Turkish government. We are controlling what is happening with our money. If you are giving money to a government, you are not really in entire control of what is paid by this money. But we needed that deal. I was a part of the deal makers, so to say, and it was successful. And what is important in this deal with Turkey is that together with Turkey and with others, we are fighting against the smugglers. It's unacceptable that in that part of the Mediterranean, smugglers are fixing the rules. Now we have a system where states, Turkey and the European Union, are fixing the rules. I don't want to be in the hand of smugglers. I'm more in favor of having a well-established rule system.
And do you think that paying money for NGOs in Turkey is really the solution, or keeping refugees in Turkey, is it really a solution at all?
Those refugees which are in Turkey, and they are more than 3 million, they are close to their home countries. It's easier for them to have between brackets normal living conditions than if they are in the north of Sweden or in the east of Poland. They are used to the atmosphere, to the temperature, to the climate, and we are trying to improve as far as feasible their living condition. It's not the solution, because the real solution would be to attack the roots of the migration problem. That's exactly what we are doing, but this part of our action is largely unknown. We put into place, we means always the Commission, an African trust fund of 2.7 billion euros. I told about this in the speech on the State of the Union. We are doing things. We have proposed, we means the Commission, 44 billions to be dedicated to what we are calling the external investment plan, which means that we are trying to attract small and medium-sized enterprises, not only those, but mainly those, to invest in Africa.
To prevent
yeah, but they don't have the same perspective as we have here on the European continent.
Definitely, values are quite different
and we
here.
have to help them, not in a caritative way, but in an economic way. We have to invest in Africa if we want to have the Africans staying on their continent. And you have to know that the Africans now, these days, are 1.2 billion people. In some decades from now, we'll have 2.5 billion Africans.
Probably without water.
Pardon?
Probably without water.
Yeah, but we have... I wouldn't say to assist them because this sounds like grandfathering.
I know, but some states can
we
struggle.
have to be there when it comes to internal solidarity in Africa.
Definitely.
Okay, this will be your last question.
Perfect. So let's end up with future, because that was...
I'm giving these long responses to prevent him from putting too many questions.
You're doing a great job. All right. I would say that your yesterday's State of the Union address was mostly about future. And you said, I quote again, we set out to... no, sorry, that's the wrong quote. As Mark Twain wrote...
all my quotes are right.
Yeah, well,
If
it
you are
was your
confusing,
quote actually, but from a different question.
Take the next one.
I'll just do this. Perfect. As Mark Twain wrote, years from now, we will be more disappointed by things we did not do than by the ones we did. Now is the time to build more united, stronger, and more democratic Europe for 2025. What do you think is the biggest challenge for Europe of 2025?
I think that it's obvious that nothing is for granted. Peace remains the main objective of the European Union. You who are younger, who was younger and who is still young, we do believe that all this is given. Peace is never given. Peace is never given. And those growing up on a continent of peace should not forget that this was a continent of wars. And we should do everything to convince countries, nations, people to be in love with another.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Kofi, President, thank you both very much. That was so very, very interesting. Monsieur le Président, nous allons continuer.
President, we're going
Tourner vers moi
to
cette
continue. You can turn towards me now.
Vous savez, nous avons reçu beaucoup de questions.
We've received many questions from web users.
L'état de l'Union, vous avez évoqué
During your State of the Union, you talked about migration,
choses concrètes.
but you didn't say anything particularly concrete about it, I'd say.
Évoqué
And Kofi also raised this issue.
Et une autre question qui nous vient de quelqu'un qui s'appelle Miguel.
We have a question now from Miguel, and he is asking, what is the EU doing to reduce the gap between the Commission and the Visegrad countries on the subject of immigration?
Well, there isn't really a gap between the Commission and the Visegrad countries. There is a gap between the other member states and the 4 member states of Visegrad. The Commission made a proposal which was approved by qualified majority by the Council. 2 of the Visegrad countries brought a case before the Court of Justice, which they lost, by the way. So it's not a conflict between the Commission and the Visegrad countries. It's a burning conflict which still persists between the Visegrad countries and the other member states. I would be very much in favor of bridging this gap between the countries of Western Europe and those of Central Europe. And I think those 4 countries of Central Europe that you mentioned simply have to accept that the refugee problem can only be resolved if we apply the principle of solidarity in Europe.
But what can you do with the EU's tools? You don't have a huge amount of power, in fact, when it comes to this issue.
When the judge makes a ruling, that we are not powerless. Once we have a ruling, and we do now have a ruling from the European Court of Justice, that means that the member states which have lost their cause have to apply the judge's ruling. And if they fail to do that, the Commission can launch an infringement proceedings with unpleasant consequences for those countries.
But you need unanimity for that.
No, in order to launch infringement proceedings, we do not have to consult the member states first.
So what can we expect then in this situation?
The rules are laid down in the treaties. So there can be sanctions, but I'm not threatening any country with immediate sanctions. We must allow this matter to settle and allow the rules to be applied.
Do you have a timeline?
I can hold my breath for a long time. You need to be able to do that in Europe.
There are other conflicts with countries in the East as well. I have a question about Poland. This is from Anja Rock. She is asking how long the Commission will tolerate the Polish government failing to respect the rule of law. What can you do?
I think Euronews should inform its viewers better about this. You should have been saying every day that the Commission has launched actions against Poland. We have an ongoing dialogue with Poland on the respect of the rule of law, and I stress this point a lot in my speech on the State of the Union. We have been inviting Poland to explain itself. It has done that. We think these explanations were insufficient, and we are looking into what other actions we can take vis-à-vis Poland. You shouldn't confuse the Polish government with Poland, by the way. Poland is a great European nation which has suffered so much in the course of history, and an overwhelming majority of Poles support the European project. So let's not confuse the Polish nation with the Polish government. Now, we have some debates with the Polish government, which are conflictual, to put it mildly.
You talk about actions and Euronews cover. We'd be interested in that. But what kind of actions could we use then?
Well, you'll have to follow our actions carefully.
Okay, we're going to move into the next section of our program. Our next YouTuber is Diana. She's from Germany. She's also produced a little clip for you to tell us a little bit about herself and her fans.
Mein Name ist Diana.
I'm Diana zur Löwen. I'm 22 and I'm a YouTuber. I'm also studying at Cologne University. I'm studying business administration. And my YouTube channel is all about beauty and fashion, but I sometimes also talk about time management, sport and politics as well. Anything really which interests me and hopefully also the viewers. I also have another channel where I talk about how I try to reconcile university studies and my YouTube presence. Apart from that, I like doing sport, and every day I try to learn something new and find it really difficult to say no. I love discovering new things and putting my heart and soul into everything I do.
Alors, vous avez vu la vidéo?
Well, you've seen the video. I have Diana with me now.
Thank you for being with us. I think we're going to enjoy speaking to the president. Before you do, I was just wondering, for you, for your followers, you've got hundreds of thousands of followers as well. What's some of the main challenges you feel you're facing as the younger generation?
I think, especially in Europe, it's how we can strengthen the bond of the European Union, especially in times of Brexit or rising parties in Germany like the AfD. I think that is a really crucial topic.
Okay, well, I think these are probably questions you can ask the president. Let's go and meet him. He's just over here.
Hallo, Frau Minister. Ja, bitte.
Dankeschön.
So, Diana, the floor is yours.
Perhaps I can begin with a question that was asked most by viewers. This is about our European community. We're facing difficult times with Brexit and federal elections in Germany. The AfD is doing very well there, and they are not so in favor of the EU. So what can we do? What can we do to increase our bond and make sure that people have a feeling of unity?
Well, unity and the feeling of belonging together can't be imposed on people from above. We have to keep explaining to people that the European Union is a reaction, was reaction initially to the events of the Second World War. It's always been about peace, and we must always never forget about that peace, internal peace dimension of the European Union. We mustn't lose sight of the need for peace in Europe. I don't want to lapse into propaganda here, but one must also constantly explain to people the benefits of the European Union. Free movement, freedom of movement, the removal of border controls, all these must be presented as progress which other people elsewhere in the world envy.
That's true. And yesterday in your speech, you said that the euro should be introduced in other countries. Is that a sign of the type of unity that you want to see?
No, that it's about resuming dialogue, starting a debate again, getting the euro moving again. Only Denmark has an opt-out from the euro. Everybody who is in the EU has an obligation to join the euro eventually. I didn't make any demands. I mean, as they say, they've been saying in the German press, I've been making all sorts of demands that people must have the euro. No, I'm just stating the facts, that those who don't yet have the euro have the option to join the euro, and we should help them by technical assistance. Sometimes financial assistance will be required as well for them to join the euro. But I don't have the intention to force any countries into the euro who don't want the euro or who can't have the euro. So a lot of the headlines in the German press were too excited.
Yes. What about economic problems and then introducing the euro there?
Well, you can only introduce the euro, or a country can only introduce the euro when it meets the criteria for introducing the euro, when the conditions are right for the euro, and when the internal economic policy has been framed correctly so that it can overcome the shock of joining the euro. You can't do anything you want before you join the euro. You have to subscribe to European discipline. And for some countries, it's just too hot in the euro kitchen.
Another topic that we're interested in, me and my viewers, is the power of companies such as Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and Apple. In a very short space of time, they've become huge companies. They're driving forward innovation as well. But of course, they have a lot of data and they have a lot of power as well. So do you see this as a danger, or do you see that as an opportunity?
Yes, I do see it as a danger, and I'm surprised that the people asking these questions are very keen customers of Google, Amazon, etc. And they are, criticizing these companies, but at the same time, they're eager to use their services. And they're helping these companies make money. I think there is a danger whenever Google or any other company has too much data at its disposal. States aren't allowed to have so much knowledge about their citizens. Quite on the contrary, there are very strict limits on the knowledge we can have about our citizens. And I see so much potential for manipulation that I do see this as a danger. And that's why we attach a lot of importance to European data protection rules. And we attach a lot of importance to these mammoth CESTs, these giants of IT, paying an appropriate quantity of tax. And as you know, we've imposed a fine on Google of over 30 billion euros, and that has hurt Google, I know.
Indeed. Perhaps a linked question. This is cyber-terrorism and fake news on all these new technologies which can be very dangerous, and we don't know how to protect ourselves from them. What is the EU planning on that score to make sure that we can live a bit more safely?
I've been the victim of fake news myself, you know. So I know it's very difficult to defend oneself against fake news unless you can trace the origin of the fake news back to state organizations. There you can take action. But it's not always easy to know where the fake news comes from. It's the same with cybercrime, cybersecurity. So I've suggested to the European Parliament that we should have a cyber defense body in the European Union where we exchange information with each other and keep each other informed in good time about cyber attacks. Cyber attacks are on the increase. Last year there were 4,000 cyber attacks where money was demanded. Ransom payments were demanded, so it's kind of blackmail. 80% of European companies have been the victim of hacks at least once a year. But we are looking into this. And the European Union has to look into matters which the member states can't cope with individually.
You were yesterday talking about the fact that you're working on a strategy to strengthen the economy and that companies should be more innovative, digital and environmentally friendly. How do you see that in practice?
We have to work very intensely to prepare a digital future for Europe, and the Commission is aware of this. We're aware of the major growth potential of the digital economy. This can create millions of new jobs. And here too, the principle applies that the member states aren't up to this task individually. They can't cope with it individually. We have to approach it as a continent.
On the environment and awareness of the environment, do we need to do more there?
In my speech, which I'm very grateful that you mentioned my speech, I did also mention that we had a very high level of ambition regarding the environment. We mustn't follow the American example. In 30 or 40 years, I think we will see where climate change has led. If we fail to get control of climate change, I fear the consequences in 30 or 40 years' time. That's why I call on European governments every day to meet their climate change obligations.
Indeed, that's something which we've been talking about before as well.
Dass ja auch das Thema viele Dinge die ganze EU betreffen.
These are topics which affect the EU very much. And in Germany, we're talking a lot about education and technology and education. That's something which is very important for my viewers. And I do get the feeling that we are lagging behind here heavily. And education in Germany is something which is dealt by the federal states. Isn't it time for the EU to be a bit more ambitious here? I'll say that we need more digitalization in the classrooms. This has got to be done in all schools, and we need to make sure that pupils have the same opportunities across the board if they move to a different European country.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about education in the German election campaign, whether it should be organized at Länder level or at federal level, whether education should be centralized. But of course, I shouldn't get involved in that debate. This is a matter for the Germans to resolve. Europe, as such, doesn't have any powers, any competence regarding education. We have to follow the treaties, which say that education is a competence of the member states. Europe isn't allowed to get involved in everything, and Europe is involved in a lot fewer things than people think. In the citizens' dialogues we have with citizens in the member states, people ask me questions about things which are nothing to do with the European Union, and because they're just beyond the powers of the European Commission. They overestimate our powers. We are not responsible for everything. National governments, national parliaments are responsible for many things, including education. Education is very definitely something which is dealt with at a national level. The European Commission works very hard, but we can't, for example, lay down to the Poles what curriculum they have to teach in their schools.
Yes, but education is such a fundamental topic. You look at learn centers for Google and Facebook as well. You get the feeling that these companies are replacing the influence of the EU, so we need to retain control, don't we?
I'm not a control freak. The European Commission is not going to control what happens in the member states every second. No, I mean, education is a matter for the nation states. And to think that it's being steered somehow from Brussels, that the educational curriculums are being designed in Brussels for 27 states, is quite wrong. The member states are responsible for their own education.
We talked about innovation and digitalization, and many large companies want to be leaner, more efficient. Are you going to try and make the decision-making process in the EU faster and leaner so that the EU can act more quickly?
In Europe, progress is very often a snail. Progress tends to take relatively long, move relatively slowly. The Commission has made some proposals to increase the efficiency of the European Union, and these are aimed at getting quicker and more effective decisions. So that means deciding fewer things with unanimity and having more majority decisions, having more cooperation so that we're not divided among ourselves.
In dem Sinne Google oder anderen Freunden, die da haben.
So Europe isn't like Google or other things you mention. We are a democratic system, so we need debate. We thrive on debate. Sometimes we have unanimous decisions. Sometimes we take decisions by majority. The European Commission isn't a steamroller that just imposes its decisions on everyone. But yes, we have to make decisions more quickly, and that's why I made those proposals to the Parliament, and so far governments haven't been too enthusiastic about.
Just a topic which I think is very important. Politics is something which we should always get to grips with, but I get the feeling that young people are fleeing from these political topics to social media. So how can we get young people interested? How can we get young people the feeling that they're being listened to? Who can one turn to in the EU in order to participate in the political process?
Well, I've already talked about the citizens' dialogues we have in the member states, and these are attended by a lot of young people who come to us with their questions, with their dreams as well. So there are channels in which you can make input to the European Union. There's the so-called Citizens' Initiative as well. So from the age of 18, you can take part in such a citizens' initiative. We would like that age limit to be lowered to 16 because by the age of 16, I think you are ready to participate, and it should be possible for you to start such an initiative. Because at that age, you're already involved in society, you already have feelings about societal issues, and these young people must be given some way of expressing their opinion, and we'd like young people to contribute more to the citizens' initiatives. Politics is going to determine our future, after all.
I'm ever so sorry, just when you're in full flow. It was so interesting. Thanks so much, Diana. That was extremely well researched. Monsieur le Président, c'est mon tour.
President, it's my turn now.
Alors, Diana, elle a évoqué la question de Schengen.
Diana raised the issue of Schengen, and you talked about it a bit yourself. In the State of the Union speech, you said that you would like to see the Schengen area extend to Bulgaria and Romania. Is that a wise proposal given these uncertain and unsafe times? I have a question from a web user, in fact, and the question is from Sally Turner. She would like to know, what is your reaction to the fact that Schengen has allowed terrorists to move freely? Perhaps we can tackle those two questions.
Border controls have been removed from some borders, but that is not an invitation to terrorists to travel freely through Europe. It's true that occasionally terrorists do benefit from it, but the prime beneficiaries are European citizens. I lived through a time where there were borders everywhere in Europe. If you're from Luxembourg, like me, you're very close to the borders wherever you are. It's a very nice country, but it's also a very small country, and I had to cross borders regularly, and this was a very costly and time-consuming thing. It took 6 or 7 hours sometimes to cross all these borders. And now we've removed those border controls, and we're being told, you're opening the borders to terrorists. No, we are opening the borders to tourists. So let's not go in for these facile amalgams.
But we have emergency rules in place. So what about these rules in times of crisis?
Please don't say that these proposals come at the wrong time. I think these are well thought out proposals. There should be some border controls, yes, because of the current security context, but sooner or later we are going to have to get away from this security, from these border controls, which are a burden. The problem is not with border controls. What we need is better mutual information between security services so that we are better prepared to deal with terrorists. So in my speech before the Parliament, I proposed setting up a European security agency which would allow data to be exchanged automatically.
But these are questions which have been bandied around for a very, very long time.
Yes, I would remind you that I was Prime Minister of Luxembourg in 2001 when 9/11 took place, and I know that our secret services could have cooperated better than they did at the time, but that has to be improved.
We're going to stick with border issues, but are moving to different borders now. I have a question from Catalonia. It was a question about Catalonia, in fact, from Victor, who is asking if the Commission will recognise a result of a referendum on the 1st of October.
I was expecting this. The Commission's does not involve itself in internal domestic debate. These are acceptable democratic debates, of course. The Prodi and Barroso commissions and my own commission have always said that we were going to respect the rulings of the Spanish Constitutional Court and decisions of the Spanish Parliament. If there were to be a yes vote in favor of Catalan independence, then we will respect that opinion, but Catalonia will not be able to become an EU member state on the day after such a vote. It will have to follow the same accession procedures as those member states did who joined in 2004.
And the same for Scotland, if the same situation should occur. They're subject to the same rules then?
Yes, and if the north of Luxembourg were to secede from the south, the rules would apply to that too.
And you're not worried about a snowball effect here, that Europe might, or countries in Europe might fragment?
Europe has a wealth of different regional traditions. This is part of the richness of Europe, but I do not want regional traditions to lead to separatism and fragmentation of Europe. But who am I to tell people what they should think if they are tempted by independence?
Well, as you can see, we're getting a lot of questions from those using the web and those following Debating Europe. And please keep on sending questions. We still have a little bit more time. But for now, we are going to move on to our next YouTuber. This is Abdel from Brussels, and here is his video clip.
Bonjour à tous, je me présente, je m'appelle Abdel, j'ai vraiment...
Hello everyone, I'm Abdel, I'm 28, I'm Belgian of Moroccan origin, I live in Brussels in Belgium. What I do is videos on internet, I talk about all sorts of things, videos about where I come from, also some political videos, and what I like doing a lot is taking very complicated subjects and trying to explain them to everybody, popularize them. So I hope that's a simple presentation of what I am. That's it, thanks.
And here is Abdel. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You're going to be meeting the President of the European Commission. Could you just tell us what you think about when you think of your future?
I'm an optimist, I must say. I think things are going to get better in the future, but looking around what's happening now, I think we're entitled to have some questions, and I hope the President will answer them.
I'm sure he will. Let's go meet him. President, this is Abdel.
J'en ai un paquet.
Oui. Allez-y.
Merci beaucoup.
Have you got any questions? Yep, I've got loads of them. Here you go. I was, collecting questions from my subscribers, and a lot of them are asking about the Rohingya in Burma. What's going to happen to them? They are considered to be the most persecuted minority in the world now. Since 1994, humanitarian aid has been pumped in to help them, over €1 million, but I think we've gone beyond that now. This isn't a humanitarian crisis anymore, it's a massacre, it's a crime against humanity. You're one of the most respected people, I think, in Europe. So what do you think? What can we do to help these people who are dying every day?
What is happening in Myanmar is an absolute catastrophe. It's a terrible situation. Once again, people are trying to get rid of a whole people, eradicate them, and Europe is trying to work with the Myanmar government and with neighbouring countries and see how we can be useful. But Europe cannot afford to be uninterested in the fate of the people that you've been talking about.
qui nous interpelle.
It's a terrible situation which we must get to grips with.
And concretely, in the short term, since thousands of people are dying every day, what is the Commission going to do to help them?
Nous ne pouvons pas intervenir
Well, we can't intervene militarily,
envie de le faire, mais
although sometimes we might like to, but we can't do that. We can assist NGOs who are trying to deal with these poor people on both sides of the border to try and alleviate their suffering, and we can try and get the UN to condemn those who are behind this situation. But unfortunately, the EU's possibilities are limited here.
What about Aung San Suu Kyi talking about disinformation about Burma?
de ses propos.
Well, I'm wondering about what she actually means by that.
Okay, I'm sure you've noticed an online petition. Has this already been done in the past to remove her Nobel Prize?
De toute façon, c'est
Well,
sur laquelle la Commission n'a
this is a subject which the Commission should not be commenting on. The Commission doesn't hand out the Nobel Prize. We don't have any. We shouldn't be giving instructions to the Nobel Prize Committee.
voir à quel résultat peuvent aboutir
We'll have to see
ces souscriptions.
what happens with this petition.
Okay, just to get the most out of you, are you going to send aid to Myanmar in the short term?
Yes, indeed, and that's what we're doing at the moment.
That's happening right now. Is it okay? Thank you very much. My second question, and I was very pleased to hear you talking about this. You've already talked a bit about Africa. You've talked about migration and helping to finance development in Africa. I see this differently, not just me, but also the people who send in questions to me. The CFA franc, that's what I'd like to talk about. The CFA franc economy is managed by France. France benefits from the CFA franc. What is the Commission or the European Union going to do? Because the CFA franc isn't helping the development of Africa. The Africans don't want it. But in spite of this, they still have this colonial currency in Africa. Is the Commission planning anything?
Well, in 1991, we talked about this, the relationship between the Sahara and Europe. I meant the president of the Financial Council, and all the finance ministers of Africa discussed the matter, and I don't see a real desire of Africans to leave this zone, which gives a certain degree of stability to Africa. Something I'm not particularly keen on. It gives young African people the impression that Europe or France is imposing its currency in Africa. I'd like to see more emancipation in Africa, but we have regular meetings with the country concerned in order to evaluate the scope of the problems which are being caused in the free zone.
I think one shouldn't mix up the people with the government, as you've already said. I'm sure that the governments like the franc, but not the people. There are millions of Africans who don't want the CFA franc. Millions of Africans speak against it every day.
Yes, I know. And I am interested in the views of young African people here and their desire to liberate themselves.
If you had the power, would you get rid of the CFA franc?
Well, that is a question which goes beyond my powers. I'm wondering about this. I'm wondering if every country which has this currency currently, if it had its own currency, would these countries be in a better situation? I'm not sure if this would be the case.
Couldn't be as bad as it is now, could it?
Well, there's always better than reality.
Okay, the other question we've been asked is that we've recently had the Feast of the Sacrifice. As Muslims, we've recently had this very important feast. There was a European directive on animal welfare, and it authorizes a community to practice freedom of worship concerning ritual slaughters as well for both Jews and Muslims. But in 2017 in Belgium, this is forbidden, ritual slaughter, and the debate is raging in the Netherlands and Germany as well as Belgium. It's a very sensitive debate, but one cannot deny that, unfortunately, some groups are using animal welfare to stigmatize Muslims, unfortunately. So, a very precise question. Are you going to launch infringement proceedings against those countries which refuse to allow ritual slaughter, although the EU directive explicitly allows for ritual slaughter?
Well, I think animal welfare is extremely important. As I'm sure you realise, madam. I was a legal counsellor for the National League for Animal Welfare for a long time, in fact. And we also talked there about ritual slaughter. The European provisions, within certain limits, allow for ritual slaughter. I'm not a fan of this, but I think we have to respect the traditions of religious communities. I've never asked myself this question, despite the fact that last year I did follow the debate which took place here in Belgium. To be truthful, though, I've never really thought about launching infringement procedures against countries who would ban this kind of slaughter without stunning.
In Belgium, we weren't able to have these ritual slaughters. Belgian Muslims weren't able. Yes, I am a Muslim. We weren't able to have ritual slaughters this year. And on the one hand, we're being told it's prohibited to do slaughter at home for reasons of hygiene, which I understand. But there is no there are very few abattoirs made available to Muslims so that they can do things according to their religion.
Yes, last year there was a very emotional debate about this. And it was a very interesting debate here in Belgium. And during that debate, I understood that we were going to put in place these kinds of structures so that people could exercise their faith.
It hasn't been done, and from 2019 it's going to become completely impossible.
Well, I'll have to think about that question.
You've got a year to think about it.
You think I've only got a year?
Un an, vous pouvez vous pencher là-dessus pour pouvoir...
Well, I'll certainly look into this, but I have to admit that I've never really thought about this before, so it's a good thing that you've raised it.
If you like, we can get together and talk about it as a team.
I've got too many teams already to talk about various things.
Okay, so that's an Islam-related subject, and I have a lot of female friends who've decided to wear the veil. They're educated, they've done master's studies, but during their studies they've been the victim of a lot of discrimination, and now they're on the labour market. But every time they come up against this principle of neutrality, which is invoked against them, and which prevents them from getting jobs, prevents them from putting all the skills they've acquired into practice. You talk about education and equality of opportunity. So how can you reconcile that neutrality principle? We don't want second-class women in Europe just because they're Muslims, just because they wear the veil. Why should they be prevented from doing certain jobs or doing certain courses at university?
Well, I would never refuse a woman wearing a veil working in the Commission. I don't see how wearing a veil could offend other religious sensitivities.
au bureau.
on how it could prevent you from going to an office meeting or working in a factory.
C'est la burqa, on dit la burqa.
The problem is, well, where we have an impasse is the burqa.
Ça, c'est une culture qui est afghane, c'est pas...
That's an Afghan thing.
Même ici à...
Well, but that does exist, even here in Brussels. I'm not too keen on it.
Concernant le port du voile,
But as for wearing the veil,
cela devrait être un signe
I don't see why we should ban this religious sign.
Parce qu'il y a des...
But what can you do? Because there are hundreds of thousands of Muslim women who are really in difficulty. I know doctors, women who have a doctorate in biology who can't find a job. What can the Commission do to help them? Because this system of neutrality is used to say, I don't want to employ you, and you can't win a case in court because of this this principle. How can you make sure that this principle of neutrality is not applied in an...
Well, one has to raise the principle of non-discrimination with a judge. This stems from European labour law, and I think an employer who refuses to employ a woman wearing the veil would be found to be in the wrong by a judge. A judge would say that's discrimination, a discriminatory application of labour law.
Okay, another question about refugees. I listened to your speech yesterday, and there's one thing that struck me. You're investing a lot in returning people to their country of origin, and I can understand that. But my question is, why not invest the same money in helping people to integrate? I mean, basically, these people are running away from war zones. Why couldn't we set up a shared immigration system? I mean, reading the media, it seems there's a migration crisis in Europe, but that's far from the truth. The countries around Syria have got the refugee problem. In Europe, the migrants are concentrated in certain countries rather than others.
Okay, this will be the last question then. In fact, there are about 5 sub-questions in that question.
C'est une façon intelligente de poser une question, mais c'est des questions. Tout d'abord, l'Europe doit rester une
Europe must be welcoming, and those who are fleeing religious or political persecution, or those who are imprisoned for wrong reasons, should be able to come to Europe. We must show solidarity.
D'être, de redevenir ou de rester.
But in order to make sure that Europe remains a continent where we show solidarity, we need to make sure that those who don't have the right to come here go back to their countries of origin. Today, only 36% of return decisions are actually implemented.
D'enlever, si j'ose dire, de la place.
And that takes away space for refugees who are being persecuted for religious reasons.
Vous avez parfaitement raison. Il faut le dire.
Let me also say that you're right. We need to say more often that yes, we do have problems with integration and hosting of refugees, but our problems are small in comparison with Syria's neighbours. In Turkey, you've got more refugees than in Europe. If you look at the proportion of refugees compared to the local population in Jordan or Lebanon, for example, the situation is the same. And you get the impression that perhaps we're the poorest place on earth here in Europe, if you look at what people are saying, but actually that's not true. It's the case more in other countries. Now, you were talking about the importance of integration. Well, we must do everything we can, and we already are in many countries. We're doing everything we can to integrate those who have come from far away. There are a huge number of volunteers who are trying to tackle this on a daily basis. They're doing their best to improve the living conditions of those who come to Europe. The member states of the EU are spending a lot of money on integrating refugees.
En 2016,
In 2016,
aligné 21 milliards
Germany spent 21 billion euros extra
faire face aux problèmes
in order to deal with the problem
résultant
and indeed the opportunity resulting from immigration.
dépensé entre
The
guillemets
Commission has spent
10,2 milliards l'année passée, l'année
10.2 billion euros last year. So I don't think we should give the impression that we absolutely don't give a damn about the fate of those who require our support.
Yeah, but there are some countries that don't implement European decisions.
résultat que le juge européen,
Or the result that
la justice européenne,
the European Court of Justice
raison à ces
has not found in favour of those countries, and the Commission
réfléchir
is now
aux mesures que nous
considering what measures it could implement vis-à-vis these countries who are somewhat recalcitrant, to put it politely. Thank you very much indeed. For those of you who'd like to know more about the future of Europe, the discussion will continue on the website of Debating Europe and, of course, every day on Euronews and euronews.com. I'd very much like to thank our 3 YouTubers for having taken part in this programme, and thank you very much indeed to the web users for sending in their questions through Euronews and Debating Europe. Thank you to the Commission's audiovisual services, to you, and of course a very warm thanks to the President of the European Commission for coming along to join us. It was a great pleasure to have you here. I'd now like to ask our YouTubers to come back into the studio.
J'ai besoin d'un selfie avec vous.
Avec
Vous
plaisir.
êtes un de vos jeunes fans.
D'accord.
Oui, qui m'a téléphoné pour me demander ça.
Avec plaisir. Regardez par là.
Etienne, oui, excusez-moi. Je ne maîtrise pas les nouvelles technologies. Ok.
Merci beaucoup, c'est gentil.
Etienne, tu me fais une photo pour le fils de notre coordinateur.